We begin our service remembering Lindy as we look into the book of Psalms for comfort. There it is written, Esayinai el heharim, me'ayin yavo Ezri. Ezri me'im Adonai oseh shamayim va'aretz. I lift up my eyes to the mountains. What is the source of my help? My help comes from the eternal, maker of heaven and earth. God will not let your foot give way. Your protector will not slumber. Behold, the protector of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. God is your guardian. God is your protection at your right hand. The sun will not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. Adonai yishmor tzetecha uvoecha me'ata ve'ad olam. May the Eternal guard your soul in your going and your coming, now and forevermore. Mizmor LeDavid. Adonai roi lo echsar, benodesha yarbitzeni, al mei menuchot yinachaleni. Eternal God, you are my shepherd, I shall not want. You make me lie down in green pastures, you lead me beside still waters, you restore my soul. You lead me in right paths for the sake of your name. Even when I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for you are with me. With rod and staff you comfort me. You have set a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Eternal forever. For Lindy, who was a woman of valor and so much more, we read from the book of Proverbs. A woman of valor who can find. Her worth is far above rubies. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and nothing shall he lack. She renders him good and not evil all the days of her life. She opens her hand to the needy and extends her hand to the poor. She is robed in strength and dignity and cheerfully faces whatever may come. She opens her mouth with wisdom. Her tongue is guided by kindness. She tends to the affairs of her household and eats not the bread of idleness. Her children come forward and bless her, her husband too, and he praises her. Many women have done superbly, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceptive and beauty short-lived, but a God-revering woman is much to be praised. Place before her the fruit of her hands. Wherever people gather, her deeds speak her praise. Death has summoned our beloved Lindy Morgan Barnett. Our souls cry out unto you, O God. What are we? Are we the creatures of dust whose destiny is but to return to the dust from which we came? The ancient sage has taught us the spirit of the human being is the lamp of the eternal. Not even the darkness of death can extinguish the light which the eternal has kindled in the sanctuary of the human soul. Therefore, O God, we thank you in this solemn hour for that which was deathless in the life of our cherished Lindy, and which is now revealed to us in all of its beauty. For her love that united us in life and which death cannot sever. For her companionship which we shared along life's path and which still continues through the tenderness of memory. For the gifts of her heart and her mind, which brought us joy and happiness and now have become a precious heritage of the Spirit. For all these and more, we give you our praise. Grant unto us, O God, the strength of all the generations of our people, who in the face of bereavement proclaimed, Adonai Natan v'Adonai Lakach, Yehi Shem Adonai Mevorach. God has given, God has taken away. Still, blessed be the name of God. When, as a student rabbi in Hudson, it became clear that I would be moving to Cleveland, I was told by Lindy and Richard's good friends from Hudson, Susie and Larry Turkle, to keep an eye out for this special family. It didn't take long for me to meet them. In a convoluted way, I'll always be grateful to Andy for that. It was the fall of 1988, and Andy was in the first 8th grade class I ever taught at the temple. The class was full of his Shaker friends. They knew each other, I did not. But I'd soon come to meet many of their parents. Let's just say that I needed some parental support to keep control of that class. But the seeds for a friendship were born in those conversations with Lindy and deepened over the years with celebrations of Todd's bar mitzvah and of enjoying Brandon too. Later, I would find Lindy sometimes by accident at the Museum of Contemporary Art gift shop, or sometimes because I sought her out at Bella Design. Because our lives connected first in temple, when she would bring her 3 adoring sons to religious school, and stayed connected through celebrating the Jewish holidays together, I want to remember her with you by sharing a passage that we will soon read at these upcoming High Holy Days. It begins like this. Imagine that on this holy day, we take a step back from the canvas of our lives. We hold up the masterpiece we call my life. We examine it. We show it to God. Every stroke, every color tells the story of our deeds. What here, why there. So let us lift up our paintbrush to canvas as we would a pen to paper, and let us reflect on the meaning of my life as we inscribe our deeds in the book of life. Lindy, an artist and an appreciator of great art, was at all times creating a masterpiece to be called my life. With every brush stroke of her life, she added color and meaning to her canvas, and it was indeed worthy of being appraised most favorably by God and human alike. Not that she needed our favor. She had the confidence of a true artist to know her intrinsic worth and let it spill over onto her canvas of life. As one author wrote, art appeals to all of our senses when its creator has put her own soul into it. A true masterpiece carries the artist's emotions. It can make you think or take you places. One look and you can feel their joy, their sadness, their love, and their chaos. A few sounds and you are almost able to transcend reality. That's how powerful art can be. Good art in any form is enhanced by setting its creator into her context. And so too do we get a greater appreciation for Lindy's masterful creation of her life by setting her life into its context. Lindy's life story began in Highland Park, Illinois, a suburb of the Chicago area. She was the oldest child of Ginny and Jerry Morgan. First Lindy, then 2 years later Scott, then 14 years later Robert. Lindy was the golden child who could do no wrong, but that was because she more than likely did less wrong than many growing up in the age of the 60s. She was kind and caring and a good study of character and content. From watching her mother, she acquired that easy, fashion-forward, effortless look. With her own natural beauty as her canvas, Lindy was an artist when it came to curating her wardrobe. It was as much a reflection of her personal style as easygoing, flowing, and free as it was of her intentionality with every detail of her life. From observing her father and his work, Lindy learned to have a keen eye for creating that comfortable and elegant setting around oneself or home. Jerry had a furniture business at the Mart in Chicago and would expand that to California as well when Jerry and Elaine made California their home. Lindy came to appreciate his world and opened her own furniture business as Bella Design, what was for decades the fashionable place for functional design and elegance. Many of us have pieces, if not whole homes, that she helped us envision. Lindy had a gift of taking an idea of what you wanted and translating it into the perfect object that would facilitate the feel and the look that you didn't even know existed. Like finishing a picture with attention to the foreground and background, she saw the whole of the scenario from person to placement. That was her gift with her siblings also. Close with her siblings and already possessing that generous heart and spirit, Lindy would often be responsible for keeping an eye out for her brothers. That would intensify shortly after she went off to college at the University of Wisconsin when her parents divorced. Though she was away, her attention never abandoned her brothers. She remained devoted to Scott and even followed him to India, where he had spent a year of studies during his teen years and where he chose to spend the last year of his illness before passing in 2013. And with Robert, Lindy was as much a sister as a mother figure. By the time you were 13, she understood that you needed a more stable environment, and she battled the courts to get full custody of Robert and bring him into her home and into the Shaker school system. Throughout those years, she welcomed your friends and your interests into her life. Here was Lindy, in her late 20s, simultaneously raising a teenager and an infant, giving to each what they needed the most, the love of commitment and the freedom to discover their talents. Even when Robert went on to OSU and later as he created his own family, Lindy would be home base for all of you. It was shortly after Lindy went off to college that she met her life partner in creating this kind of open door policy in their home. Richard was a sophomore dating some of the freshman girl in the SDT sorority suite. Occasionally he'd sit in on a bridge game with the group, and there was this pretty girl with a contagious smile and dreamy kind of eyes that saw through a person and immediately understood who you were. She would sometimes sit across from him at those games. She was just a freshman, but one of his friends encouraged him to take her out, saying, "Lindy's the kind of girl you take home to your mother," not knowing that Richard's mother had passed away when he was only 9. In Lindy, Richard discovered not only her outward beauty and fashionable, easygoing style, but an inward beauty that was nurturing, accepting, and embracing of him and everyone she knew. She became part of his family, enjoying his sister Nancy and remaining devoted to her children, welcoming his father into their home in later years. Lindy was the piped piper who painted a person into her picture of life with enduring empathy, creating her own modern art form of a family. And it was already in college that Lindy and Richard would develop their mutual passion for collecting modern art and interpreting its value through their shared value of family first. With the birth of Andy, and then Todd, and then Brandon, each just 2 years apart, Lindy's heart just kept expanding with joy and love. With strong maternal instinct, she was the mom who sang kids' songs and Broadway show tunes in the car, or tried drawing you out and listened intently while driving you to your many activities. She just adored her boys. You knew she was there for you as good company, as a snack provider, as a mom who welcomed your friends at every age. She made the effort, went the extra mile, became the host to the team after a softball game or to the whole camp for a reunion. She even invited Brandon's whole Woodbury class, rather whole grade, to come over to the house to study its architecture when you, Brandon, were at that easily embarrassed 6th grade age. But secretly you were proud to be that boy whose mom was cool and welcoming. Lindy fit right in when you boys would bring over some of your classmates for a pickup basketball game, and both of you would convene boys and also girls to hang around, the hostess with the mostess. She loved celebrating you kids at every turn, and even as you went away to college or moved away, kept your friends close. This was true even after Andy died. Andy's friends held a special place for Lindy as a continuous connection to her son. Watching them grow up was her way of keeping Andy's memory vivid. However, for Lindy, as with many artists painting or writing, after the tragedy of the loss of a child, there is often a notable change of some sort, whether in color or subject. No doubt the deep wound to Lindy's soul created a demarcation in her manner, but she remained devoted to Todd and to Brandon. As Todd started bringing Emily around, I started to hear about your special friend who would become your wife. And then Brandon brought Natalie into the family. I saw pictures and enjoyed catching up on your lives through Lindy's proud stories. Having raised boys, she was excited to have girls to spoil and to take on shopping sprees that could easily go from TJ Maxx to Saks. She inspired you with both her sense of fashion and function, teaching you to ship your purchases home to avoid tax and the judgmental eyes after a major shopping spree. She was about quality, and she knew she had 2 quality women with whom to share her boys and enjoy life together. You fostered a strong connection for your families with her supporting Brandon's daily calls and Todd's frequent visits. You included family in everything Lindy and felt entirely welcomed by her as daughters-in-law and friends. And when the grandchildren came along, some continued with the name Mercedes had given Lindy when she had trouble pronouncing her name, that of Lala D. And to others she became Yaya, as that got butchered even more. It didn't matter what those kids called her. She was just thrilled that each of the grandchildren were calling her, FaceTiming her, and visiting her. Lindy tried to develop special relationships with each of them, with Lily and Annie and Cece and Andrew and Liam. She never went anywhere without thinking of them first and finding just the perfect little gift for you, sometimes a book, sometimes a t-shirt, always a loving memento. And she took you with her to museums, to vacations, to Broadway shows, shared book reviews, listened to your chatting, and enjoyed laughing with you. At every turn, she was opening you to the world and to the art world through her generous heart and mind. It was especially in these last years, as Lindy's health became a complication, that she depended on all of your generous hearts too. Richard, you facilitated her care above and beyond, bringing her breakfast in bed as a routine to help her feel loved, bringing her medications and taking her to doctors to add years to her life. And just this past month, making sure she got to her father's 95th birthday celebration meant the world to Lindy. How terribly saddened we are that Lindy was not granted length of years like that. Lindy will be remembered not because she collected art or decorated homes, but because she collected people. All of you are a tribute to that. Lifelong friendships, friendships that she acquired just the other day. All of these deepened her soul. Vincent van Gogh once said, "I feel that there is nothing more truly artistic than to love people." For Lindy, who appreciated the arts of music, literature, and painting, who supported artists and by her own pen had a flair for poetry, the art form for which she showed the greatest appreciation was that of the master creator, God's creation of the human being. By every standard, because she loved people, let them know it, and in return, such feelings were reciprocated toward her. Lindy was an artist creating a masterpiece to be labeled My Life. Let us appreciate the masterpiece of her life as we join with the sages to declare, Zichrona Livracha. May her memory continue to be our blessing. Amen. Lindy was a powerful force in the life of all those who knew her and loved her, who adored her from near and from far. Because, as with any great piece of art, when viewed from every varied distance or angle, we see or hear something new and anew. So we're going to hear now from her beloved husband, from Richard, who from the intertwining of their hearts knew Lindy best. And from Brandon, who, though living far away in Oklahoma, never let the miles obscure his vision of his mom. And from Todd, who alone always made sure to keep them close.
Good morning. I've written out a lot of things that have been on my mind, and Rabbi Rosie, touched on some of them. So as I go through this, it's going to change a little bit, so bear with me as I edit my own thoughts. Lindy and I celebrated our 51st wedding anniversary on June 21. That was a long time, but it wasn't long enough. Lindy came to Cleveland from Chicago in July 1970 and immediately put her college degree to work teaching educable mentally disabled kids at the Suburban School East. I remember vividly how rewarding she found this calling. At that job, she met a woman named Susie Gordon. And through Susie, another woman named Sally Siegler, 51 years ago. The three of them had dinner together about 5 weeks ago, and all the time in between. But that's just one story. That's not that group. It's everybody, and that's who she was. She connected people. Here are a couple more. In 1976, a young married couple with a 1-year-old infant came face to face with teenage reality when Robert came to live with us. Lindy essentially said to me, "We're going to do this." And what am I going to say? Okay. Helping to raise Robert was a rewarding experience for both of us. And we know for Robert too. But it clearly did not prepare either of us for the challenges of becoming parents to 3 more teenagers 12 to 15 years down the road. As the rabbi said in 1986, in 1986, Robert was married at our home, and the officiant was Larry Turkle, who also happened to be the best man at Lindy's and my wedding. About the time Robert was settling in at our first home on Brighton Road, my sister Nancy Mack passed away after a long struggle. Well, I think I was a pretty good uncle. Lindy was the glue that really helped to maintain those early relationships with Jeff, Zibby, and Rob. And of course, Bob, and now Bob and Patty, all of whom are here today. To digress, Lindy was a sports fan, and her favorite sport was pro football. We started going way back when. She eventually became a Browns fan. And it was tough, let me tell you, being a Browns fan, as you all know. Our last in-person Browns game was in Denver in November 2019 as part of a weekend stay with Bob and Patty. The one-year-old infant I referenced earlier was, of course, Andy. He was born in 1974, quickly followed by Todd and Brandon. You heard that. But more about them in a moment. And nearly 20 years after Robert first came to live with us, my father needed safe refuge. Lindy didn't blink and welcomed him into our home for nearly 4 years with an open heart and unyielding love, often preparing dinner for as many as 7 on a nightly basis. 3 sons were quite a blessing, but not without some angst. Andy died in October 2000 after a terrifying 5-year struggle. His passing broke Lindy's heart. That pain never went away, but her heart did heal with help from Todd and Brandon, and then their wives, Emily and Natalie, and ultimately 5 grandchildren, Lily, Annie, Cece, Drew, and most recently, Liam, who's having fun over there. This isn't written, but I remember distinctly, Lindy had a Econoline van that we retrofitted with 3 bench seats, and the boys were only 4 years apart in total, and at one point, Lindy put one on the back bench, one on the middle bench, and one on the front bench, and she was driving her van, and they're still fighting. And her response was, "Stop having fun." Todd, I know Todd and Brandon's hearts are heavy, but there are many memories they'll treasure. I wish Lindy would have had another good 10 years. But she was grateful for what she got. Todd and Emily have been married 19 years, Brandon and Natalie only 6, and Lindy's relationship with her sons and daughters-in-law grew with each passing year. Even during COVID, FaceTime and more recently Zoom really are incredible, and all of you know that. Lindy treasured being a grandmother, and you heard about the La La Dee. Mercedes couldn't say it. It was Aunt Lindy, but it was La La Dee. Lindy named herself La La Dee. That was her moniker. That was her choice. She didn't want to be Grandma or Nana. La La Dee was what it was going to be. Our eldest grandson, is named after his uncle Andrew, Drew. Brandon and Natalie wanted to honor Andy, but deferred to Lindy for her approval. They were afraid. She was thrilled. Lindy played a little game with all of the kids from about age 18 months. Liam was a little too young, up to maybe age 4 or 5. It was called Tutu Yagala, where she took their hands and played with them and then tickled them at the end. And the kids always said, "Do it again, do it again." And she did. I don't think anything gave her more pleasure than being La La Dee, and she came by it naturally. And it was cultivated in part as godmother to Elisa Siegler and Jared Zach who are now both in their mid to late 40s. Lindy's mom, Ginny, moved to Cleveland in 2004 to be closer to family. Lindy, like many mothers and daughters, had a challenging relationship. But Lindy struggled to make the best of it, even as Lindy's disease collided with Ginny's infirmities. Ginny passed away in late 2019, just prior to COVID. The rabbi also mentioned her relationship with her brother Scott, who was 2 years her junior, and developed cancer and spent time as a youth in India with his uncle. And he and his partner wanted to go back, and that's where he wanted to die. And Lindy flew to visit in the spring of 2019. She said, "I'm going." She got there. She went through Germany, landed in India, spent a day and a half with her brother, got on a plane, and came right back. Sounds like me, traveling all the time. It was very important for her. Okay. I mentioned furniture and friends. Lindy never pursued a career in furniture, but it sort of followed her. She started Bello Design in 1999 and operated the business successfully for 19 years, winding it down in 2018. From the ground up, she built a business and sustained it with terrific assistance from Salinaro Batitis, Susie Kornbluth, Lori Lindboom, Matt Garson, Jen Johnson, and others along the way. Those people were not just employees. They were much more, like everybody that came into Lindy's life. Most such small businesses don't survive the startup phase, let alone 5 years, and Lindy maintained her business successfully for nearly 2 decades. After she shut down Bello Design, she channeled her furniture genes toward volunteering at the gathering places, monthly warehouse sales, and building new friendships with women who previously might have been only casual acquaintances. I might add, she dragged Susie Kornbluth with her to the gathering place for those new adventures. Lindy had a disparate group of friends. But beyond that, she really connected people. I could tell you 100 stories, but I told you one already, but let's focus on one in particular, or a couple. She had several continuing high school relationships. The most important one was a woman named Susie Foreman, who now lives in Boca Raton, Florida, and that was a high school friendship. But so many of her long-lasting early friends were developed while in college. Linda Goldstein, now Sherwood, Robin Novick, now Malamed, and Susan Paley, now Zach, all came into her life in 1966 and remain there today. I'll give you a little bit more about that in a minute. Lindy was also extremely close to a group of 9 SDT, University of Wisconsin sorority sisters, 7 of whom survived as of today. They used to gather every year, once a year, for a 3-day weekend, often in Chicago, but I think Lindy organized the group in Vail, Colorado one year. During the pandemic, the group began Zooming at least once a month, and most recently just a couple of weeks ago. Lindy was a voracious reader. The Kindle on her iPad had more books than I can even count, and she's read all of them. Sometimes she forgot she read it and read it again. Her book club adventures go back more than 30 years, in part to a group that included and might have originally been started by Sherry Grossman. Lindy's book club adventures continued with several of you as recently as 3 weeks ago, the night before she went into the hospital. She was fine. A little bit of a cough. Although meeting by Zoom for the last 18 months, pre-COVID, when it was Lindy's turn to host the group, She prayed for good weather so they could gather outdoors in our backyard around the pool. Our eldest granddaughter, Lily, who turns 16 next month, is an avid reader. And it was wonderful to see a new book club beginning to burgeon, building the relationship between the two of them. The cornerstone of Lindy and my relationship, other than family, has always centered around art and travel. Most of you know that. And that was since day one. Her love of Broadway and the music associated with it also played a big part. Let me focus on travel for a minute. I hope you got no place to be, because this is going to take me a few minutes. We never purchased a vacation home, in part because we wanted to go here, there, and everywhere. And we really did, until COVID. And we resumed traveling again last month. While in California late June and early July, in part to spend time with Lindy's dad, Jerry, and Elaine for Jerry's 95th birthday, we were surrounded by family. There was a small celebration of 15, and of course, it was planned by Lindy. During that trip, we spent 2 evenings in Los Angeles with Linda Sherwood, one of the 1966 group, and her husband. Linda also happened to be the maid of honor at our wedding. What else did we do during the 4 or 5 other days we were in California? We went to 2 museums and several art galleries. Of course. We were an urban couple. The beach was only an alternative if it brought the family together. When traveling, we were more oriented to places like New York, San Francisco, Paris, and Tokyo. Last month in California, when we were driving from Palm Springs back to LA and stuck on traffic on whatever that highway's called, it took us twice as long as it should have, and we were listening to the Broadway channel. I asked Lindy to tell me her 2 most favorite trips. And she said number 1 was a trip to Japan in 2018, with 3 days in Tokyo and then 11 more days on a cruise, where we visited many of the Japanese islands. We had an incredible time. The second was a trip to Peru, where we visited first Lima and then Machu Picchu. I would have picked the same 2, but in reverse order. Machu Picchu was before Lindy first got sick. Obviously, Japan was after, but it never slowed us down, never slowed her down. Some of the travel dates back to the 70s, going to Montreal and Quebec City with Robin and Mitchell Malamed. And then the perfect place for young marrieds, Niagara Falls, with Sandy and Sally Siegler, pre-kids, of course. More recently, a trip with Karen and Bruce Kearns in the south of France. And then most recently with the Malameds, again for Lindy's 70th and Mitch's 75th milestone birthdays, where we spent a terrific 3 days in Washington, D.C. in November 2018. And with Robin and Mitch's indulgence, we went to a couple of museums, which they enjoyed, and we also went to a pre-opening Broadway show that opened in Washington, D.C., and then, of course, it went to New York, and it played for at least a year. I can't think of the name of it. Traveling with friends was special, but most of our travel was just the 2 of us. We kind of enjoyed each other. Lindy didn't need to travel, though. She did it with friends, too. I already mentioned the annual Group of 9, the get-together of the SDT girls. But in the 90s, there was an annual girls' trip to Florida with Peggy Bernstein, Judy Rand, and Carol Glick. Harriet Carter goes back with Lindy to newborn children days. She went to Ohio State. She lived in Macon, Georgia. She married a guy from Cleveland. They stayed here for a couple of years and then went back to Georgia. and eventually retired in Hilton Head. But that did not preclude Lindy from continuing that relationship. We spent time with them on our annual pilgrimage south every year, and Lindy and Harriet spoke often. Lindy was going to visit them again this coming October for a week, while I was going to go to North Carolina to work. Everywhere we went, we could find an art gallery or a museum. We sought them out even in places like Lyon, France, and Shanghai. For anniversaries and birthdays, we usually bought each other a piece of art, and it was always a collaborative effort. But I will tell you, her eye at finding the right piece was better than mine. So if you like our art, give her the credit, and if you don't, you can blame me. Our home is filled with art, and every piece has its own Lindy and Richard story. And I will treasure the memories of the stories even more than the art. Lindy's interest in art goes back to college. In all honesty, she corrupted me, and there is no doubt in my mind that our relationship was strengthened by our travels while focusing on art. We purchased our first work of art even before we got married at a street fair in Chicago, and it's still hanging in our house. Lindy's real interest in art developed when she began working at what was the forerunner to MoCA. Back then it was called the Cleveland Center for Contemporary Art, or the Center. Marjorie Talalay was an early mentor, but Lindy's relationship with Rosalie Cohen was the real glue that got her stuck. Rosalie moved here with her husband from Canada and brought with her the concept for operating a sales and rental program. That plan was approved by the center board and was put in place by Rosalie and Lindy, in part to help local artists and also to encourage young collectors to enjoy art without having to actually purchase it. Lindy was also actively involved in starting the store. I think the rabbi mentioned that. When the museum was at the Carnegie Building, and acted as a volunteer buyer, making annual trips to the New York Gift Fair to acquire inventory, which no doubt helped her in later years when she started buying for her own business. Going back to before Carnegie, when the center was on Bellflower, and long before moving to the Playhouse Building on Carnegie, I'll never forget when they opened a temporary satellite space in the Galleria Building downtown. It was new at that time. It wasn't very full. They opened a satellite space in part through the generosity of Richard Jacobs, who was the developer, and also a big art collector. And Lindy was working there one day during a show that was featuring Andy Warhol's prints. So that's when they were affordable. A lady stopped there on her lunch hour, and Lindy came home that night and told me that I asked this lady if she needed any help, and she asked me if I was Mrs. Warhol. Let me tell you, the fact that she wasn't was Warhol's loss. Broadway and its music were interwoven into all of this too. I remember when we took three pre-teenage boys to see Les Mis here at the Playhouse in the late 80s. The music of Broadway was always playing in our home and our cars. In 2010, Lindy traveled to New York with her 16-year-old niece, Mercedes. Just the two of them. It was Mercedes' first trip to New York. And what did they do? They saw two musicals, Billy Elliot and Phantom of the Opera. And of course they went to the Museum of Modern Art. Mercedes made an effort to return that love by coming to visit as recently as a few months ago. Every December until COVID, Lindy enjoyed planning for a theater event at the Beck Center with the Ohio Barnetts. And we were looking forward to resuming it this year because it was canceled last year, obviously because of COVID. Various adventures to New York led us to playbill cruises. We were at some show in New York, and they give you the playbill, as you all know, and there's this ad for playbill cruises. He says, "Oh, that sounds like fun," because I think it was definitely after her first illness, and it was harder for her to walk places, which she always did. She just walked a little bit slower. But so Playbill gave us the option to take a cruise and hear Broadway music, and it was always staffed with Broadway stars. It's really, Lindy loved it. I loved it too. I could go on, but we'd be here for much too long. I have mentioned a lot of people who connected with Lindy and who were in her heart, but there were many more who had there were many more of you who had a special relationship with her. You know who you are and why you had that relationship, and why it blossomed and why it continued for so long. I need to speak a little bit about scleroderma. Lindy died from complications of an insidious connective tissue disorder called scleroderma, which is only one of many autoimmune diseases. It's often hard to see autoimmunes, but when someone tells you they suffer from one and that person is close to you, pay attention. Lindy was first diagnosed in December 2013, 6 months after the disease started to attack her body. Summer of 2013, and she just returned from India. Everything was fine. Her body started to balloon. In 2 months, her shoe size increased by 2. In 2 months, and she could no longer wear her rings. So what did she do? She took her wedding ring, she flattened it, she put it on a gold chain, and she never took it off. We were on a cruise on the Rhine in November, not a Playbill cruise, that we took for her 65th birthday, and she really felt lousy. But she powered through like she always did. The rheumatologist that she'd been working with were giving her steroids that weren't helping at all. And it's only because of Raleigh Moskowitz that she was not further debilitated. He was semi-retired at the time and not taking new patients. Lindy called him at home. We knew him from outside of medicine because he went way back. He and his wife, Peter, went way back with my sister, Nancy, and Bob. She called him at home, and he met her a day or two later, between Christmas and New Year's, in his office. The office was closed. There were no nurses. He examined her. He sat us down, and he said, "I think you've got scleroderma." And I said, "Scared of what?" Literally. He sent her to get a biopsy, and the diagnosis was confirmed. I honestly believe that Raleigh's diagnosis saved her life then and allowed us to get the treatment she needed to prolong her life, but also helped her to make it more productive. Even after fully retiring and prior to his own death, Raleigh kept in touch regularly and followed her course of treatment, and I'm forever grateful. When diagnosed nearly 8 years ago, no one at university hospitals or the clinic was terribly familiar with the disease. Sure, they knew what Raynaud's was and Crest and other forms of the immune, but nobody was focusing on scleroderma. There wasn't enough research money focused on it, and the drug companies weren't producing drugs for it. The drug that really helped her was called an orphan drug. It's not even approved by the FDA for treatment of the disease, but it worked, and that was helpful. Now, however, both of these Cleveland institutions have specialists in rheumatology focusing on scleroderma. In early 2014, there were about 10 teaching hospitals around the country, actively involved in treating scleroderma and conducting research Lindy she volunteered to go through a trial as well, drug trial. I had to inject her in her belly for about 3 months, once a week, for a trial, because she wanted to see if it would help her and maybe help others. The closest two hospitals where we felt we could get the best information on scleroderma were at UPMC in Pittsburgh, University of Pittsburgh, and Ann Arbor at the University of Michigan. We wound up in Pittsburgh, quite honestly, because it was 1 hour's drive less each way. And we began going about every 6 or 8 weeks. They see back then, they saw hundreds of patients a month, scleroderma. So they focused on it, they understood it, they worked with it. Even though we knew the diagnosis, she was really sick in the spring of 2014, and then on and off into early 2015. She was hospitalized 2 or 3 times until the doctors could really hone in on what was going on and chart a proper course of action that really brought the disease under control. You know, you look at her, you talk to her, you didn't know. I mean, you saw her hands were crippled, but she never complained. Her doctor in Pittsburgh worked cooperatively with a hematologist here, Dr. Alvin Schmeier. And Lindy probably was closest with him here because he saw her every month. And because part of the disease affected her red blood cells and she needed booster shots. And we were grateful to him and the entire UH team because she had some really good doctors. The National Scleroderma Foundation has an annual patient information meeting. It moves around the country every summer. It's kind of it's a way to have a vacation, but it's always educate. We didn't go early on. It was in Chicago in the summer of 19. And Lindy said, let's go. I said, okay, let's go. I didn't know what to expect. It was not only uplifting, but it was also frightening. And there were more than 700 people in attendance. And those were people who had scleroderma and people like me who were living with or taking care of or partners with scleroderma patients. It was uplifting because you heard about new research. It was frightening because while everything was reasonably good with Lindy then, we looked around at other people and she was so much better than a lot of people that we both questioned, you know, where's this going to go at some point? Because it is a progressive disease. I'm almost done. At that meeting, I think it was 3 days, and there was one session we didn't want to go to. We snuck away and went to the Art Institute of Chicago. But they had a presentation about the German artist Paul Klee, K-L-E-E. And I'm sure you all know the name. I don't know how much you know about his art. He was very famous. Klee suffered from scleroderma. They didn't know what it was, and it's only looking back in hindsight that they could see what it did to his skin and how it was tearing him up. And you could see in his art how it got darker and darker and darker, not just in tone, but in the visuals of what he was producing as the disease progressed and ultimately took his life. Lindy suffered for 8 years, but Lindy had the disease for 8 years. She didn't suffer. Her disease didn't hold us back. It just slowed us down a little. Lindy's form of disease was systemic, and you could see how it crippled her hands. So you can only imagine what it was doing to her internal organs. She was often in a lot of pain, but fortunately it was fleeting. It was like electrical shocks. They would come and go. And she never, ever complained. Not even in the privacy of our own home. There was no woe is me for her. We knew this day would come sooner rather than later, but in my wildest dreams, I did not see this coming. And I've shared this with some of you, and maybe you got it secondhand. Even last Friday, the attending physician in the ICU had essentially said she was out of the woods. And several of you in this room, I think 4 or 5 people, we had visits. And I said to the doctor, I said, could she have visitors? Because she was on a ventilator. And you all know horror stories for ventilators. I'm digressing. And when we went into the hospital, she had real trouble breathing. And the doctor, the attending physician on the floor, and you know it's a teaching hospital, happened to be her pulmonologist, that never happens. And so he knew her, he knew us, and he gathered it together on Wednesday morning, 2 weeks ago. And he said, I'd like to put you on a ventilator because I think it'll help you. It'll help me make you better. And she was texting with Emily at 9:37, and at 10:20 she was on the ventilator. She said, will I be able to sleep if I go on the ventilator? Because she hadn't slept in a day and a half. She had the lung infection. You wouldn't have known that Monday night on the Zoom meeting, would you, that we're on the phone with her, on the Zoom thing? You wouldn't know it. She said, will I be able to sleep? And the doctor said yes, and she said wonderful, because she needed the sleep. Well, they don't want to keep you on a ventilator for more than 14 days, even though they do in some instances. They took her off the ventilator in 8 days because she was feeling better. She wasn't feeling better. They had knocked out the infection. One of you was there when they sat her up in bed on Friday and gave her physical therapy. And she FaceTimed with the kids, and they said that day they were supposed to move her out of the ICU. They couldn't find a bed in the hospital; it was so full. So they kept her in ICU one more night. They moved her on Saturday. We got her settled in her new room. She still had a feeding tube because they didn't want her taking solid food till this week. We're going to take it out on Monday. And I stayed till the shift changed because it was a new surrounding and new nurses. And I kissed her goodnight. I said, I'll see you in the morning. And she said to me, of course, go home and get some rest. She was more worried about me than she was her. Saturday night, an hour later, something went terribly wrong. And she was gone. Okay, Lindy brought light into every room that she entered, and she was always concerned about everyone else, never herself, and that's her legacy. I can't stop without mentioning Rabbi Haim. You know she told you a little bit about the history. Rosie's been with us a long time. More Lindy than me, Rosie. You know that. Good times and tough times. And while I'm not the most spiritual person, I do take a lot of solace from the fact that you are here with us today. Thank you. You want me to wipe this down? You want me to call them up? They're ready? You guys ready? Most of you know these two fellows. We're in the same bubble, but I'm still going to do this. Where do you want me to put it? There's no... Oh, there it is. I'm sorry. Sure.
Okay, I'm going to try to get through this, and it's a lot briefer, I promise. More brief, but that was awesome, so thank you. I just want to touch on one of the common themes and one of the things that my dad touched on that you'll see again, but I'm just going to summarize it in a shorter way. So as I look around this room and I reflect on the outpouring of support over the last few days, I see my mother now more than ever as a true connector of people. As Malcolm Gladwell defines in his book, The Tipping Point, a connector is someone with an extraordinary knack of making friends and acquaintances. Gladwell states connectors are an elite group of people so expert in cultivating connections that they are the reason the rest of us are connected too. The point about connectors is that by having a foot in so many different worlds, they have the effect of bringing all of them together. So as Richard said, Lindy truly was connected to people and was a connector of people. We're lucky to have been loved and supported by her. While her life was shorter than we expected, she lived it to its fullest and surrounded herself with family and friends at every moment possible, connecting with them. So I just wanted to thank you all for sharing your lives with her. So connecting back to her, because it takes two. It takes more than one person. It takes a community of supportive individuals to have connected relationships. So you're our connection now to her memory and legacy. So may we keep it alive and strong and live our lives through social, supportive connections with everyone we meet, like Lindy did every day. Excuse me while I pull up my notes, sorry. There we go. Good afternoon. For those of you who know my parents, but don't necessarily know me, I'd like to tell people I have Richard's drive, determination, unfortunately his male pattern baldness, and I have Lindy and Richard's love for arts, travel, fashion, particularly when it came to shoes, but most importantly, Lindy's love for people. Lindy left us too soon, but I like to think with a full heart. She was a great friend and mother to many. She was generous with her time, attention. She always made you feel like you were the most important person in the room. She loved being around and connecting people. There were always people at the house growing up. At first, it was our parents' friends, many of you, and then each of our own, Andy's as well. She was diagnosed with scleroderma in 2013, as you've heard. It impacted her physically. She was slower, colder. She couldn't shake her hand or give you a high five, but it never changed her mind, her heart, or her spirit. She lived with this terrible disease for 8 years, but as my father said, she never complained. I think one other important thing is Richard never complained either. And we want to thank him for taking care of her these last 8 years, and we believe extending her time with us. We're all sad that she's gone, but I personally have found joy in knowing that she's now reconnecting with her firstborn Andy, her brother Scott, and her mother Ginny, among others. Although I'm not so sure how excited she is about the last one. We just want to thank you guys all for being here and being supportive, and we look forward to staying connected with each of you, as my brother said. Thank you very much.
Each of you has precious memories of Lindy. We take a moment now as we silently compose the eulogy of our own hearts. In the rising of the sun and in its going down, we will remember her. In the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, we will remember her. In the opening of buds and in the rebirth of spring, we will remember her. In the rustling of leaves and in the beauty of autumn, we will remember her. In the beginning of the year and when it ends, we will remember her. When we are weary and in need of strength, we will remember her. When we are lost and sick at heart, we will remember her. When we have joys we yearn to share, we will remember her. So long as we live, Lindy too shall live, for she is now a part of each of us as we remember her. We ask God to receive Lindy's soul with the words of El Malay. Please rise. El Malay Rachamim Shochein Ba Maromim Hamtzei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei HaShechina Im Kedoshim Utehorim Kezohar Harakia Mazhirim Et Nishmat Leah Bat Yirmiyahu Vevered Shel Halcha L'Olama Baal Harachamim Yastireha Beseter Kanafav L'Olamim V'yitzror B'yitzror HaChaim Et Nishmata Adonai hu nachalata v'tanuach b'shalom al mishkava v'nomar. Amen. O compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Lindy Morgan Barnett, who has entered unto eternity. O God of mercy, let her find refuge in your eternal presence, and let her soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is her inheritance. May she rest in peace, and let us answer, Amen. We join together in the words of Kaddish, the words that link all of our generations together in this soulful moment. Together we pray. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah, v'yalma divrach hirutei v'yamlich malchutei. B'chayachon uv'yomechon uv'chaye dechol Beit Yisrael ba'agala uv'izman kariv v'imru Amen. Yehei shmei Rabba mevorach leolam ulalmei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitalev v'yithalal shemei dekudesha b'rechu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata. Tushbechata v'nechemata da'amiran bi'alma v'imru Amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen. A miracle is ended. A precious soul returns to her Maker. Hamakom yinachem eschem betoch shara avlei Tzion v'Yerushalayim. May God comfort you along with all the mourners of Zion and of Jerusalem. Amen. On behalf of the family, they'd like to invite you to join them for the Shiva period, which will take place at their home. It will be today until 6 o'clock. And Sunday from 2 to 5. They'd like to let you know that the backyard is large and welcoming, and they hope that many of you will join them there. And if you're in the house, they would ask you to please wear a mask. There are 3 little ones who are too young to be vaccinated, and we'd all like to protect all of them. We conclude our service with the words from our tradition. Boachem l'shalom, seitchem l'shalom. As your coming here was in peace, so may your going forth now be in peace. This concludes our service.
Oh, okay, wait here. anchor, and then make a right onto a. And if you miss anchor, then make a left back up, and then make a left back up.
There's a lot of people you've seen earlier. Come on. Oh, yeah, those are some towers.
Cece, how about this huge clock tower? It's a clock tower, Cece. I want a clock tower, Dada. I want a clock tower, Cece. Come on, Dada. Where's the clock tower? Where's the clock tower all the way down there? Look, Cece, clock tower, Cece. Look, clock tower, Cece. Oh, there, look, clock tower.
Oh, that's a lot of weight.
Okay.
I unzipped it. I was so curious. I shoved it in there. I couldn't quite zip it shut, but I actually jammed my rubber band. Bye, guys.